"Get this filthy man away from my car!" The shout cut through the blistering heat like a siren. A well-dressed man in a tailored suit stood beside a stalled Range Rover, pointing angrily at the older mechanic kneeling beneath it. Grease smeared the man's calloused hands and streaked his silver hair. A small crowd gathered near the gas station on Route 89, just outside of Elbridge, Arizona. Some passers-by pulled out phones, filming the escalating scene. The old man slowly stood up, unfazed by the outburst. He wiped his hands on a faded red rag, his eyes calm and steady behind a pair of scratched safety glasses. The tension was thick. Who even lets someone like that touch $100,000 vehicle? The man sneered. Moments later, the crowd would fall completely silent, not from anger, but from awe. The engine wasn't breathing right. That was the phrase Harold Ames used: not stalling, not failing, breathing. Like a living thing trying to catch its rhythm. He stood in the sterile hush of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory's combustion testing wing, watching columns of data scroll across the CRT monitor. Outside the reinforced glass, the latest prototype of the Mars-bound Raptor 3 engine sputtered through a low-thrust test cycle. White noise from the high-speed cameras hummed like nervous insects, and the smell of scorched titanium lingered faintly in the vents. Harold crossed his arms, deep in thought. His team had built this engine from the ground up. A revolutionary closed-cycle system that promised to reduce weight while increasing combustion efficiency by nearly 17%, a feat that could make interplanetary travel economically viable within a decade. But right now, the numbers didn't lie. The fuel pressure was inconsistent, oscillating just enough to make the thrust chamber unstable. Not dangerous yet, but unpredictable. And Harold Ames didn't believe in letting things reach yet. He turned to the whiteboard at the edge of the lab and uncapped a red marker. Diagrams flowed from his hand like instinct: injector rings, temperature zones, modulated pressure overlays. A second later, he paused and tapped the board twice. "There," he said it under his breath, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile idea forming in his mind. The issue wasn't with the oxidizer, as the team had theorized. It was with the fuel mixer's second stage delay. Too much turbulence in the flow caused erratic combustion at low thrust. He reached for his notebook, flipped to a blank page, and began drafting a redesign. That's when he heard the door open. Dr. Lionel Chang, Harold's direct superior and one of the most respected propulsion engineers at JPL, stepped into the observation room, sipping stale coffee from a thermal mug. His lab coat was immaculately clean, and the steel gray of his hair made him look more like a dignitary than a scientist. "You're still here?" Lionel asked. "It's Saturday." Harold didn't look up. "The engine's fluttering at 64 kilonewtons. I'm correcting for pressure delay in the mixer." Lionel raised an eyebrow and moved closer to the screen. "It's within safe parameters. This won't be a problem during actual launches." Harold shook his head. "That's not the point. If we can stabilize it here, we build in more margin on Mars. No surprises." A pause. Lionel studied him for a moment, then let out a dry chuckle. "You're a perfectionist, Harold." Harold finally looked up. "I'm an engineer. That's supposed to be the job." There was a silence between them, tense but familiar. The kind of silence shared by men who respected each other, but had fundamentally different philosophies. Lionel valued deadlines, deliverables, and political finesse. Harold valued precision, integrity, the math. "You'll burn yourself out," Lionel said at last, heading for the door. "I'd rather burn out than be wrong," Harold muttered after him. The door clicked shut. By midnight, Harold had reworked the mixer design entirely. It would require a change in the fuel line architecture and a new cooling loop to accommodate thermal stress. It wasn't just a patch, it was a leap. He packed up his notes, slid them into his briefcase, and exited the lab. The hallways were dark and empty. As he passed the faculty wall, a corridor lined with framed portraits of JPL legends, he paused beneath the most recent edition, his own photo. Added only 6 months ago after his presentation at the International Aerospace Conference in Geneva. He looked at the image. He looked like someone important. But all he felt now was tired. Outside, the desert air was still and warm. The stars shimmered above the San Gabriel Mountains. And for a brief moment, Harold let himself imagine something bigger than schematics and deadlines. He imagined standing on the red dust of Mars, engine smoke still rising behind him. Humanity's footprint pressed into another world. He didn't know that in less than 10 years, everything he had built would be erased. Not the engines, but his name. At first, it was just a typo. Or so Harold thought. A datasheet from last week's Raptor 5 stress test had been uploaded to the shared JPA server. Harold scanned the numbers while eating lunch at his desk, idly double-checking output temperatures against predicted values. It was something he often did, a personal ritual. A way to keep himself sharp. But line 46 on the report bothered him. The pressure stabilization time was listed as 0.83 seconds. That wasn't right. Harold paused, wiped his fingers clean of potato chip salt, and pulled up the internal system logs from the test bay. The raw telemetry was available only to those with top clearance. He still had it. For now. In the original logs, the value was clearly 1.19 seconds. He blinked, refreshed the browser. It hadn't changed. The data on the official report was wrong. No, doctored. The next day, Harold brought it up to Nia Tompkins, the propulsion analytics lead. She was meticulous and direct, someone Harold trusted. I found a discrepancy, he said, handing her both reports. The log says 1.19. But the sheet filed with engineering says 0.83. That's not rounding error. That's something else. Nia read both silently. Then, she closed the folder and handed it back. That's above my pay grade, she said carefully. Maybe they smoothed it for the stakeholders. Smoothed? Harold repeated, his voice sharp. Marketing wants clean numbers. Minor adjustments happen sometimes. Her tone was clipped, eyes darting toward the door. Harold's jaw tensed. These aren't budget projections. This is live thrust vector telemetry. If we lie here, something explodes out there. She didn't answer. That was the first time Harold noticed it, the shift, the tightening of expressions, the way conversations stopped when he entered the room, the unease. And it wasn't paranoia. Not yet. 3 weeks later, the near catastrophe happened. The Raptor 5 was undergoing a full-duration fire test, simulating an orbital engine restart. It was Harold's favorite part of the program, a phase that would allow the spacecraft to alter trajectory mid-mission, enabling planetary alignment corrections. The chamber was humming at 88% capacity. Everything looked green on the surface. Then, without warning, a sudden spike in internal chamber pressure blew the secondary cooling valve offline. The engine vented superheated oxidizer across the shielding wall, scorching everything in its path. Only a redundant safety interlock, added by Harold months earlier against pushback from leadership, shut the system down in time. The fire suppression team was there within seconds. No one was hurt, but the engine was partially destroyed. The post-mortem report blamed Calvin Ho, a summer intern who'd programmed a timing sequence incorrectly. Harold was livid. He marched straight into Lionel's office the next morning, clutching the error logs. This wasn't Calvin's fault, he snapped, slapping the folder onto the polished glass desk. The sequence was overridden manually 2 days before the test. There's a flag in the system logs. Lionel didn't flinch. Then it must have been a senior tech adjusting for redundancy. There was no record of the change in the audit file. That's not a correction, it's sabotage. Or at best, negligence. Lionel leaned back, exhaled deeply, and gave him a look that Harold had never seen before, part pity, part warning. Harold, we're at the tail end of a 5-year program that's behind schedule and over budget. Everyone's under pressure. If you want to help, Fix the next iteration and stop chasing ghosts. Harold felt his pulse rise. If the next iteration explodes on the pad, are we going to blame a different intern? Don't be dramatic, Lionel said sharply. You're not some martyr. You're an engineer. So engineer. That night, Harold didn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, staring at the paused TV screen, some rerun from the History Channel. A documentary about failed Soviet space missions. He thought about truth, about data, about the astronauts who would one day sit atop the engines he helped design. He thought about how one changed number, just one, could kill someone. And in that moment, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to believe. The corruption was systemic, not a fluke, not one rogue adjustment, but a culture of omission. And now he had to decide what to do about it. The following week, Harold began quietly collecting data. Backups of raw logs, redlined printouts of altered figures, anomalies swept under final reports. He stored it all on a private drive, hidden behind false directories in his personal laptop. He wasn't planning a leak. Not yet. But the weight of the evidence was becoming unbearable. Then, during a closed-door design review, something finally snapped. A manager proposed removing 2 critical safety interlocks from the updated Raptor 6 model to reduce launch weight. Lionel agreed. Harold stood up. If you do that, you might as well hand the astronauts a loaded gun. The room went dead quiet. Someone chuckled nervously. We'll mitigate elsewhere. No, Harold said. You won't. And I won't be part of this. He left the room, walked out, badge still swinging from his neck. By the time he reached his car, security was already calling him. The letter arrived in a crisp white envelope with the NASA seal stamped in blue across the top. It had no return address. Just his name, Dr. Harold Ames, printed neatly in sans serif typeface. As if that alone could disguise the gravity of what was inside. He already knew what it was before opening it. Inside, 2 sheets of stiff paper and a silence that screamed louder than rockets. Effective immediately. You are placed on administrative leave pending a formal review of your conduct during internal design review sessions, due to concerns raised by senior leadership. Your access to secure JPA resources has been suspended. Harold set the letter down on his kitchen table, the sunlight slanting through the blinds striping it like prison bars. He stared at the final line. This is not a disciplinary action. However, any contact with media or external agents during this time will result in formal termination and legal review under Section 3.7 of your confidentiality contract. It was punishment, masked as protocol. In the days that followed, Harold's badge no longer worked at the lab gate. His email account was deactivated. Colleagues who had once greeted him in the hallways now avoided eye contact at the grocery store. Even Nia, who had once asked him for help calculating injector lag, wouldn't return his calls. His office was cleaned out by someone else. The plant he kept near the window, the one that had survived 3 engine tests, a fire alarm, and 1 earthquake, was dead by the time someone dropped it on his porch in a cardboard box. Inside the box were 2 notebooks, a nameplate, and a printed memo. He recognized Lionel's signature at the bottom. Please respect the process. It would have been easier to cave, to apologize for misconduct, to sign the NDA and take the quiet retirement they offered, a 6-figure pension, sealed files, and a slow fade into obscurity. But Harold couldn't. Not when the truth was being buried. He'd spent his life solving equations, perfecting engines to carry others into the stars. But now, his integrity was all he had left, and he wasn't about to compromise that just to save face. On a rainy Tuesday morning, he sat down with someone who still wanted to hear his story. The contact came through a second-year journalism student from Cal Poly, who emailed him out of the blue. She said she ran a niche aerospace blog called Throttle Point, and she was willing to publish anonymous whistleblower stories. Harold agreed to meet. They sat at a corner booth in a diner in Altadena. The young woman, named Ira Lang, was earnest and nervous, clutching a small recorder and a battered notebook. Harold brought a flash drive filled with logs, test footage, and design notes redacted for safety. He told her everything. The data discrepancies, the altered test reports, the pressure from above, the safety compromises. He didn't name names, but anyone who worked at JPA would know who he meant. Kira listened intently, occasionally nodding, occasionally shaking her head in disbelief. By the time the waitress came with their check, Harold felt lighter, and somehow older. Kira asked, "Do you want your name on this?" He thought for a long time, then said, "No, not yet." The article was published 2 weeks later. The engine that lied, whistleblower details sabotaged safety protocols in Mars mission program. It received a few hundred views, a few shares on niche science forums. No major outlet picked it up. But someone noticed. 3 days after the post went live, Harold received a certified letter from NASA's legal department. They were initiating formal termination proceedings. The fallout was swift. Officially, he was dismissed for violating confidentiality. Unofficially, he was blacklisted. Within a month, 3 universities rescinded their invitations for guest lectures. One removed his archived publications from their online library, citing internal review. He tried applying for private aerospace firms. Every door shut. He'd gone from respected innovator to persona non grata to the public. He had simply vanished. Harold sold his house in Pasadena, donated half his books to the local library, and packed everything else into a single U-Haul trailer: old tools, 2 guitars, 3 binders of calculations no one wanted, and a few snapshots of a life that now felt foreign. He left no forwarding address, no goodbye email. He just drove. No destination. Just west. Through the mountains. Through the deserts. The cities blurred past: Vegas, Flagstaff, Albuquerque. He stopped in diners when he was hungry, slept at truck stops, fixed his own engine once outside Barstow. And then, somewhere near the Arizona border, he turned down a narrow county road after spotting a for sale sign on an old gas station. Elbridge wasn't on the highway signs. It wasn't even marked on most updated maps. The town sat in a pocket of dust and cactus just off Route 89. A place travelers didn't stop unless they had to. And sometimes not even then. Harold found it by accident. Or maybe it found him. His pickup was low on gas, and the digital gauge had started blinking red when he saw the rusted sign swinging in the desert wind: Thomas Garage and Fuel, Mechanic on Duty. The lettering was faded, the neon long dead. He pulled in. The station looked like it hadn't been touched since the 70s, 2 weathered pumps, one leaning slightly left, and a single garage door with a hand-painted cactus beside it. Dust coated everything in a permanent amber hue. No music played. No air conditioning hummed. Just the wind and the ticking sound of his cooling engine. Harold got out, stretched his stiff back, and approached the garage. He was about to knock when a man stepped out, wiping grease off his palms with a torn flannel rag. Mid-40s. Wide frame. Thick mustache. "You're leaking coolant," the man said in a thick southwestern drawl, pointing at the stain beneath Harold's front tire. "That's either a cracked radiator or a lazy thermostat. Want me to take a look?" Harold hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I'll trade you 5 gallons of gas for the fix." The man looked him over, like a poker player reading tells. "Name's Thomas," he said, sticking out a hand. "Harold," came the reply. "But people call me Bops." It was the first time he'd said it. He didn't know where it came from. Maybe it just fit the man he was trying to become. Thomas had owned the station for 15 years. He inherited it from his uncle, who'd inherited it from his uncle, and so on back to the days when Elbridge had been a rail stop for cattle and miners. Now, it was mostly truckers, lost tourists, and locals who couldn't afford to drive to Flagstaff for repairs. "Business is slow," Thomas admitted as they leaned against the hood of Harold's truck that evening. "I keep it running because it gives my son something to do after school. But I'm no master mechanic." He glanced at Harold. "You, though, You know what you're doing. Harold shrugged. I've fixed a few engines in my day. Want a job? The question hung in the desert air. Harold didn't answer immediately. He looked out over the horizon, at the jagged hills. The sky burning gold and purple. Something about this place felt like the opposite of Pasadena. Here, no one asked for credentials. No one knew his history. There was only the engine, the fix, and the dust. He nodded. I'll take it. By the end of that week, Harold had fixed 5 vehicles, rebuilt a rusted compressor, and cleaned the fuel injection system on an abandoned 1988 Chevy that hadn't started in a decade. Word got around quickly. Elbridge's new wrench wizard. One rancher called him. He touches your car. It purrs, said another. Harold worked quietly, efficiently. He didn't talk about the past. He didn't own a smartphone. He paid cash, lived in an old Airstream trailer behind the garage, and rose each morning with the sun. In a place where nothing moved fast. That was enough. Tomas's son, Luis, was 10 the first time he watched Pops fix an engine. It was a Saturday, and a delivery truck had broken down outside the post office. Pops had it running in under 30 minutes. Luis had stood nearby the entire time, eyes wide. How do you know where to start? He asked afterward. Pops handed him a wrench. I listen. Machines speak. Most folks just don't know how to hear them. From that day on, Luis came by the shop every afternoon. He brought Pops sweet tea. Sometimes questions. Sometimes silence. But always curiosity. Harold saw something in the boy, something pure. The way he looked at engines reminded him of the way he once looked at the stars. Over the next 2 years, Harold became a fixture of the town. He fixed engines. Yes. But he also fixed clocks, fans, water pumps, and, once, a grain mill no one else could figure out. People started calling him Pops without knowing why. It just stuck. He was never loud, never showy. But his presence was grounding, like steel under stress. Strong, unmoving. Still, he kept the past locked away. Until the day Luis found the photograph. The wrench was too heavy for Luis's small hands. But he carried it anyway, gripping the handle like a sword. Knuckles white from determination. He had borrowed it from Pops to help his dad fix the washing machine at home. It had worked. Sort of. Now he was returning it. Like always. Slipping into the workshop through the side door. Pops wasn't there. The garage was silent except for the creaking of the roof in the wind and the ticking of an old analog clock that hung crooked on the wall. A set of dusty blueprints lay curled on the workbench beside a half-dismantled alternator. Luis stepped carefully, reverently, past shelves stacked with carburetors and rusted coffee cans full of bolts. He placed the wrench on the bench, then paused. A worn, leather-bound book lay open, forgotten on a stool near the back of the room. The title read, Thermodynamics and Propulsion Systems, Volume 2. He reached for it, slowly, almost guiltily. As he lifted the book, a photo fluttered out and landed on the floor. It was yellowed with age, creased at the corners. But the image was unmistakable. A younger version of Pops, clean-shaven, in a pristine white lab coat, stood beside a large, cylindrical engine model with pipes and wires twisting like a spine. Behind him was a wall lined with insignias, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA. His name tag read, Dr. Harold Ames. Luis stared at it, eyes wide. His heart pounded as if he'd stumbled on something sacred, something secret. That afternoon, he waited outside the trailer longer than usual, twisting the photograph in his hands until Pops finally emerged, wiping grease off his palms with a rag that looked like it had survived 2 world wars. Is this you? Luis asked, voice barely above a whisper. Pops stopped. His eyes flicked down to the photograph. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he took it gently, like it was made of glass. Where'd you find this? It was in the book. On the stool. Pops looked at the photo, then at Luis. His face didn't show anger or surprise, just acceptance. I was younger, he said finally. Back when people called me doctor instead of Pops. Luis's eyes lit up. You worked for NASA? Pops gave a dry chuckle. A long time ago. Did you build rockets? Did you go to space? No, he said. But I built the engines that helped others get there. Luis sat down on an overturned paint bucket. Hands on his knees. Eyes locked on him. Why'd you stop? Pops didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat beside him and looked out at the desert. The horizon burning gold in the late afternoon light. Sometimes, he said slowly, doing the right thing costs more than doing nothing at all. Luis frowned. I don't get it. Pops leaned back, folding his arms. Imagine you're building something. Something big. Bigger than yourself. A rocket. Maybe. And you find out someone's cutting corners, cheap materials. Bad numbers. Dangerous stuff. You could ignore it. Keep your job. Stay quiet. Or, you could speak up. Luis thought. So you spoke up. I did. Did it help? No one died, Pops said. So maybe. But you lost everything? Pops looked down at his hands lined with age. Calloused. Burned. Steady. I lost what they could take, he said. But not what mattered. From that day forward, something changed between them. Luis stopped calling him Pops just because others did. Now, he said it with a deeper respect, like it meant mentor, teacher, hero. And Pops, for his part, began to talk more. Not about names or places, but about ideas. He taught Luis how to strip down an engine. Yes, but also how to build a pressure chamber from an old propane tank. How to calculate air compression using a straw and a stopwatch. How every machine, no matter how complex, began with a question. Never be afraid to ask why. He told Luis one afternoon as they replaced a cracked timing belt on a Dodge pickup. Questions build engines. Silence breaks them. Sometimes, Pops would trail off in the middle of explaining a process. Lost in memory. Luis would wait. And eventually, he'd continue, like a man trying to rebuild not just machines, but trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the jagged ridgelines and the town fell into its nightly stillness, Luis asked, do you ever miss it? The labs? The rockets? Pops didn't answer right away. Then he said, I miss believing we were all aiming for the stars. Luis thought about that. But maybe, Pops added, helping one person find the right path, that's worth just as much as building engines for Mars. The old filing cabinet in the back room hadn't been opened in years. It stood half covered by a blue tarp, buried behind boxes of rusted lug nuts, cracked fan belts, and a dusty lawn chair with one missing leg. Pops had mentioned once that it was just junk. But Luis, curious as always, thought otherwise. He had been helping clean up the shop for the county's annual safety inspection when he spotted it. The bottom drawer was jammed, rusted shut. He jiggled it gently, then harder, then wedged a flathead screwdriver into the side and twisted until it gave a reluctant screech and slid open. Inside, a weathered manila folder, a roll of duct tape, and a small, matte black external hard drive. Luis blinked. It didn't look like junk. He turned it over. No labels. No stickers. Just a faint serial number scratched onto the back with a pencil. His heart beat a little faster. He glanced toward the garage door. Pops was outside, replacing spark plugs on an old station wagon. Luis slipped the hard drive into his backpack. That night, long after his father had gone to bed and the desert was dark and still, Luis plugged the drive into the family laptop. At first, it didn't respond. Then, a flicker. A folder appeared, /archive/core/aims. He clicked it open. Inside were dozens of subfolders, each labeled with strings of code, dates, and acronyms Luis didn't recognize. But some words stood out: Raptor, Thrust, Mars Engine Test, Whistle Notes, and one simply titled, Fail Safe. Luis clicked again. What followed was a flood of documents, engineering diagrams, technical memos, encrypted PDFs. Many were password protected. but a few opened freely: pressure graphs, video logs, even internal communications. Luis watched a 30-second clip of a test engine roaring to life in a sealed chamber. The blue-white flame dancing like a ghost in a vacuum. Then he found the photos. Images of Pops, much younger, smiling with a team of engineers. Handshakes with suits. Even one blurry image of him at a podium. Slide behind him reading, Propulsion Integrity in Human Flight Systems. Luis leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed. Pops hadn't just worked for NASA. He had been at the center of something huge. And it looked like someone, maybe multiple someones, had tried to erase it. The next day, Luis tried to act normal. But Pops noticed the shift. "You all right, kid?" he asked as they changed out a drive belt on a rusted Ford Bronco. Luis hesitated, then nodded. Later that afternoon, he finally worked up the courage to speak. "I opened a drawer yesterday," he said. "In the back room." Pops didn't look up. "That's so?" There was a hard drive. Now Pops did look up. His eyes sharpened, not angry, but alert. "Did you plug it in?" Luis hesitated. "Yes." Pops set down his wrench, stood slowly, and walked to the far end of the garage. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, he said, "That drive was supposed to stay buried." "Why?" Luis asked. "Because what's on it ruined my life once. And it could do it again." "But it's the truth," Luis said. "Right?" Pops looked at him, really looked. "Yeah," he said. "It is. But the truth doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it paints a target." 2 days later, the first visitor arrived. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the station just before closing. Pops was inside restocking coolant when he saw it. The man who stepped out wore jeans and a blazer, and had the kind of posture that screamed federal, military maybe, or intelligence. He smiled too much. "Hey there," he said casually. "Just passing through. You the owner?" Thomas stepped forward. "We both run the place." The man nodded. "That's so? Name's Mark. I work in defense contracting. Do a lot of travel. Heard there was an old propulsion guy down this way. Thought I'd stop and see if the legend's true." Pops emerged from the shadows, wiping his hands. "Legend's retired," he said flatly. "No tours. No autographs." Mark grinned wider. "That's fair. But in case you ever want to talk shop." He handed Pops a sleek black business card, no title, just a phone number. Pops didn't take it. Mark placed it on the edge of the counter. "Sometimes what's buried finds its way back to the surface. You know how that works." Then he got in his car and drove away. That night, Pops stood outside his trailer, watching the stars rise above the desert. Luis stood beside him, silent. "I thought if I disappeared, they'd forget," Pops murmured. "That the world would move on. But they haven't." "No. And now I've got you caught in the middle." "I don't care," Luis said. "They should know what you did. What you tried to stop." Pops looked at him, his face softening. "Truth is like fire, Luis. It can warm you, or burn your house down." He glanced toward the garage, then back at the sky. "And I think the wind's changing." It began like any other Tuesday. The sun rose over Elbridge in a blaze of copper and gold. Pops was already up, tightening the bolts on an old F-150 axle mount. Luis swept the front of the station. Thomas brewed his infamous motor oil strong coffee in the back office. All was as it had been for years, quiet, simple, grounded. Then the Range Rover pulled in. It was sleek, spotless, and so out of place it looked like a spaceship parked next to a rowboat. Jet black, with California plates and tinted windows. As it stopped, a puff of dust curled around its wheels like the desert recoiling from something foreign. The driver stepped out. A tall man in his late 30s. Clean cut, tailored navy suit, polished shoes, sunglasses that cost more than most of Elbridge's monthly rent. He looked around like the air offended him. "Someone here fix engines?" he asked. his tone already brimming with irritation. Thomas gestured toward the bay. Yeah. Pops'll take a look. What's the trouble? Won't start. Some dashboard warning. I need it fixed fast. I've got a meeting in Phoenix in 3 hours. Luis opened the hood while Pops walked over, wiping his hands. The man spotted Pops and frowned. You're the mechanic? Pops nodded. The man looked him up and down, grease-streaked jeans, a faded hat, oil-stained hands. You've got to be kidding me. This is who works on 6-figure vehicles out here? Luis stiffened. Pops said nothing, already checking the diagnostic line. You don't even have gloves on. The man snapped. Do you know how sensitive the engine sensors on this model are? Still no response. Look. The man continued, raising his voice. I don't care what kind of hillbilly operation this is. If you screw this up, you're paying for the damage, if you even have a bank account. Luis stepped forward. His face flushed. Hey, but Pops raised a hand gently, stopping him. The crowd had begun to form. Elbridge wasn't big, and commotion drew attention fast. 2 teens from the Burger Shack were filming on their phones. An older woman waiting for a tire rotation gasped and whispered to her husband. The man turned, now addressing the growing audience. Can you believe this? He laughed. I come out here, needing a simple fix, and I'm handed some grease monkey grandpa who looks like he crawled out of a junkyard. That's when Luis did it. He walked to the back of the garage, retrieved something from the locker, and came back holding a photo. The photo. He held it up high, shaking slightly. His name is Dr. Harold Ames, Luis said loudly. He built the engines that helped get rovers to Mars. You're standing in front of someone NASA tried to erase because he told the truth. The crowd hushed. The man blinked. What? Luis turned to the crowd. Look at the picture. Look at the badge. Look at what they took from him. The man scoffed. You're saying this guy built space engines? Just then, another voice spoke up. I've seen that face before, said a woman in sunglasses near the pumps. She pulled out her phone, tapped quickly, and turned the screen toward the man. A grainy screenshot from a 1994 article appeared, showing Pops, Harold Ames, presenting in front of a propulsion schematic. Oh my God, someone whispered. He is Dr. Ames. The arrogant man paled slightly. His swagger wavered. He looked at Pops, really looked. You used to be with J.P.A.? Pops met his eyes for the first time. I still am, he said calmly. Just without the politics. A slow murmur moved through the crowd. Someone clapped. Then another. Within seconds, half the group was cheering. One of the teens live-streamed the whole moment with the caption, "Rich guy insults NASA scientist turned mechanic. Gets destroyed by the truth." The man muttered something under his breath, got in his car, and drove away without fixing the engine. By that evening, the clip had gone viral. The next morning, a small satellite news crew showed up at Thomas's garage. Then 2 more. Then a documentary podcast team from San Francisco. Reporters from aerospace blogs, science channels. Even a retired astronaut sent an email asking to meet the man who saved the Mars mission and walked away from it all. Pops stood behind the counter while the phone rang and rang. He answered none of them. That night, Luis sat beside him on the bench behind the trailer, the stars thick above them like scattered metal shavings. You're all over the internet, Luis said. People are finally seeing what really happened. Pops sipped from a chipped mug. They're seeing a version of it. Luis turned to him. Aren't you proud? Pops looked at the sky. Pride built the rocket. Truth kept it from exploding. He let out a long breath. But I didn't fix all the damage. Not back then. I just ran from it. Luis was quiet for a while. Then he said, maybe now's your chance to fix some of it. Pops nodded slightly. Maybe it was. She hadn't heard his name in years. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Dr. Maya Lin, propulsion systems director at Orbex Aerospace, was scrolling through her news feed during a layover in Denver. Her thumb stopped on a video with the headline, Mechanic called a nobody, turns out he designed engines for NASA. She nearly dropped her coffee. There he was, grayer, slower, and wearing a mechanic's shirt, but the eyes hadn't changed. Still sharp, still steady. Still the same man who had once stood beside her in Lab C at JPA, guiding her hand as she nervously calibrated a pressure valve for the Raptor 3 project. She clicked the video. She watched the insult, the defense, the silence, the reveal. By the end, Maya was staring at the screen, stunned. It was like watching a ghost step into the sunlight. She closed her laptop, booked a rental car, and rerouted her flight. 2 days later, she arrived in Elbridge. The town looked exactly like the kind of place Harold would disappear to, quiet, sun-bleached, untouched by industry. The gas station came into view near the bend in the road. A small crowd lingered outside, and a banner flapped lazily above the pumps. Thomas Garage, home of the Mars mechanic. Maya smiled wryly. That wasn't his doing. It was the internet's. She parked, stepped out, and crossed the lot. Luis spotted her first. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands on a towel. "I'm looking for Pops," she said. "Or Harold Ames." Luis hesitated, scanning her face. Maya reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph. It was dated 1991, Harold standing beside a younger Maya, both of them laughing in front of a scorched Raptor test engine. "I think he'll remember me." Luis nodded and disappeared into the garage. Harold was leaning over a carburetor when he heard the voice. "I thought I told you not to teach interns how to override pressure regulators without a senior present." He froze. Slowly, he turned, and there she was. Maya, older, of course, but still with that no-nonsense expression that masked a brilliant mind and a loyal heart. She wore a blue blouse, jeans, and a watch with a Mars rover engraving. Her hair was streaked with silver now. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Harold broke into a rare, quiet smile. "You always knew how to time an entrance." Maya stepped forward and embraced him. It wasn't the kind of hug you gave out of sympathy. It was the kind you gave when you finally found something you thought was gone. They sat under the awning behind the station, sipping iced tea and catching up. Luis lingered nearby, pretending to organize sockets while eavesdropping with wide eyes. "I saw the footage," Maya said. "I couldn't believe it." Harold chuckled dryly. "Believe it? Internet turned me into a myth." "You were already one," she said. "People just forgot." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't want to be remembered." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because I didn't finish what I started. I told the truth, and it didn't change anything. I lost everything." "No," Maya said. "You lost something. But you gave the rest of us permission to question. I stayed in the field because of you. And now I run my own engine lab. Your name's still on the internal structure of our hybrid ion drive, unofficially. Of course." He blinked. "You kept my designs." "I built on them," she said. "And now the world knows who gave them life." Word spread quickly in Elbridge that someone from NASA Times had come to visit Pops. Reporters started showing up again. But this time, they weren't after gossip or scandal. They wanted verification. And Maya gave it. She appeared on Good Morning America via satellite link and said plainly, "Harold Ames designed one of the most important propulsion systems of the late 20th century. If not for his design, our first real attempt at Martian orbit might have failed. He saved lives. And then he was erased because he chose integrity over silence." Within hours, #DrAmes trended nationally. Pops didn't say much about the attention. He kept working. He tuned up tractors, changed oil filters, and taught Luis how to rebuild a spark plug without breaking it. But Luis could see the difference. Pops stood straighter now, laughed more often, smiled when strangers stopped by not to gawk, but to say thank you. One evening, Maya brought him a gift. A small silver plaque engraved with the Orbex logo and his full name beneath it, Dr. Harold Ames, father of the flame. He looked at it for a long moment. "I never wanted a legacy," he said. "You got one anyway," Maya replied. And now people will know. He nodded, carefully placing the plaque on a shelf beside his socket set. By the following week, Pop's story had been shared by everyone from Wired to NPR. An op-ed in the New York Times called him a quiet titan of American aerospace. A segment on PBS titled The Mechanic Who Engineered the Red Planet aired during prime time, featuring excerpts from Meyer's interview and archival test footage once thought lost. And through it all, Harold Ames kept fixing engines. He politely declined interviews from every major outlet. He ignored podcast invitations and turned down an offer to sell the movie rights. A national documentary crew had parked outside the shop for 3 days before Thomas finally told them to go film a cactus instead. But the letters kept arriving, hundreds of them, from retired engineers, from high school science teachers, from students who had watched his story go viral and decided to pursue aerospace. And then there were the official ones. NASA sent a formal apology. Brief and sterile. We acknowledged the role Dr. Harold Ames played in the early Mars engine initiatives and regret any failure to appropriately credit his work. It came with a plaque and an invitation to speak at the National Spaceflight Summit. Harold didn't respond. Luis, on the other hand, was growing more excited by the day. He had never imagined that the man who taught him how to change brake pads would one day become the face of engineering ethics across the country. People keep asking me what it's like to work with you, Luis said one morning as they aligned a drive shaft on a Chevy Tahoe. I just tell them you're my mentor. Pops gave a half smile. That's a big word. It fits, Luis said. You didn't just fix engines. You helped me understand them. One afternoon, a woman arrived in a silver rental car with Oregon plates. She introduced herself as Avery Moreno, director of a non-profit called the Ethical Propulsion Institute, a think tank dedicated to transparency and safety in aerospace design. She handed Pops a folder. Inside, blueprints for a new clean burn hybrid engine. The institute had funding. They had a prototype lab. What they lacked was someone to finalize the combustion model. We don't need you to lead the team, she said. We just need your mind. And your voice. Help us build something right. From the beginning. Pops said nothing. He read every page of the proposal that night, under a single dim light bulb in his trailer. He hadn't touched a schematic like that in years. But his hands still remembered. The next day, he sat with Luis under the awning again. The desert wind rustled a broken banner in the distance, and the sound of passing trucks echoed in the background. I got an offer, Pops said finally. Luis looked up from a rusted distributor cap. Yeah, they want me to help build a new propulsion system. Safer, cleaner, transparent from day one. Luis leaned forward. You're going to do it, right? Pops hesitated. I walked away from all at once, he said. I let it fall apart behind me. I'm not sure if going back changes anything. Luis shook his head. It's not going back. It's moving forward. On your terms. Harold looked out across the open desert. He thought of the engines he had built, the missions he had helped guide, the silence that had swallowed his name, and the boy sitting beside him who now carried his legacy forward without even trying. Maybe it wasn't about rewriting the past. Maybe it was about building something that could carry others beyond it. That evening, Harold called Avery. I'll help, he said. But only if we make two things clear. Name them. She replied. First, no corner cutting. Not ever. I walk the moment someone decides PR matters more than propulsion. Understood. Second, he said, glancing at Luis through the trailer window, I choose my own apprentice. Over the next month, Pops split his time between Elbridge and Oregon. He video called the new team weekly, reviewed test data, made design suggestions, and recorded tutorials with Luis assisting behind the camera. He never sought fame, but he accepted responsibility. And slowly, the legacy that had once been erased began to take root again, not in headlines, but in equations, in mentorship, and in the honesty of good work done right. On a cool spring morning, Luis received an envelope in the mail. It had the Caltech seal in the corner and began with the words, "We are pleased to inform you." He ran to the garage, Beaming, Pops didn't say much. Just placed a hand on Luis's shoulder and nodded. "Guess I'll need a new assistant soon," he said. Luis grinned. "You'll always have one." The last week before Luis left for Caltech passed like the soft wind that blew over Elbridge, quiet, warm, and filled with unspoken meaning. Harold didn't say much. He still showed up every morning at the same time, wiping his hands on the same rag, sipping the same lukewarm coffee from a chipped white mug. But his movements were slower now, more deliberate, as if he were memorizing the weight of each tool, the sound of each bolt tightening, the scent of oil and dust that had become part of who he was. Luis worked beside him until the very last day. The boy, now nearly a man, had grown taller, more confident. He spoke with clarity, moved with purpose, and understood engines in a way that went beyond mechanics. He understood why things worked, and more importantly, why it mattered that they did. It wasn't just about fixing machines anymore. It was about protecting the people who relied on them. On Luis's final afternoon in Elbridge, the sky was a pale, endless blue, and the garage was quiet. Most customers had already stopped by in the morning to wish him luck. A few left envelopes. One left a book. One woman brought him a pie. Thomas hugged his son tightly and left early, saying he didn't trust himself to stay without getting too emotional. Luis stood in the garage doorway, wiping his hands on a rag that used to belong to Pops. His bags were packed. His bus would arrive at dusk. "Hey, old man," he called out with a teasing grin. "You gonna make me leave without a goodbye?" Pops didn't answer. He simply gestured for Luis to follow him behind the shop, toward the metal shed that hadn't been opened in years. The padlock was thick with rust. Pops pulled out a key from his pocket, turned it, and with a groan, the door creaked open. Dust billowed out, catching the sunlight like golden smoke. Inside, everything was covered in canvas tops, boxes, crates, and old shelving units. But Pops walked straight to the back and pulled away a covering to reveal a long, flat workbench. Sitting on it was something Luis had never seen before, a model engine. It wasn't like any he'd seen in the shop. This one was sleek, compact, and complex. Its chamber was hand-machined, its injector heads engraved with microscopic notations. It looked like something out of a museum, yet more alive than any relic. "I built this before I walked away," Pops said, brushing the dust off the casing. "Never tested it. Never published it. It was supposed to be the next generation. Safer. More efficient. But I didn't trust the system anymore. So I kept it to myself." Luis stepped closer, eyes wide. "Is it real?" Pops nodded. "It works. On paper and in principle. But it needs someone younger to bring it to life." He reached beneath the bench and pulled out a heavy black notebook, wrapped in wax paper. "This," he said, placing it in Luis's hands, "has everything. Equations, simulations, failures. It's not perfect, but it's honest." Luis held it like a sacred object. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Don't say anything," Pops replied. "Just do better than I did." Later that evening, they stood together near the road, the horizon blushing with the last streaks of sunset. The distant sound of the approaching bus grew louder with each passing minute. Luis slung his duffel over his shoulder. "You sure you're gonna be okay without me?" he asked. Pops smirked. "I survived bureaucrats, budget cuts, and a failed orbital burn. I think I can handle a week without you dropping sockets all over the floor." Luis laughed. "I only dropped them 3 times last week." 5. Pops corrected. The bus pulled into view. Luis turned, suddenly serious. "You changed my life, Pops. I'll never forget what you taught me." Harold reached out and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You changed mine, too," he said softly. "Now go build something worth remembering." Luis boarded the bus. Pops stood there long after it had gone. Over the following months, Pops went back to work. Quietly, steadily. He didn't return to NASA. He didn't move to Oregon. He didn't chase fame, but his name now lived in textbooks. His notes were studied by graduate students, and his ethics were cited at aerospace symposiums across the world. Still, he remained in Elbridge, fixing engines, helping farmers, and answering the occasional letter from a curious kid in Kansas or a retired scientist in Ukraine. Sometimes, on Sunday mornings, he would open Luis's notebook and see the handwritten updates, calculations, improvements, test results. Luis was building the next engine, and this time, the foundation was solid. One winter morning, a package arrived. Inside was a photo, Luis standing in front of a full-scale engine model at Caltech's propulsion lab, beaming with pride. Underneath it, a note: test fire in 6 weeks. It started in your garage. Thank you for everything, Luis. Pops didn't say anything. He just placed the photo on the shelf next to the old plaque Maya had given him. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to feel something close to peace. Because some legacies aren't built in laboratories or on awards stages. They're built under dusty hoods, in quiet moments, and in the unwavering hands of those who choose truth over glory. Harold Ames never reclaimed the life he lost, but he gave the next generation the tools to build something better. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth more than all the stars he'd ever dreamed of reaching.